So I'll start with question two first. The reason that most companies, not only in a tennis, but most places fail, most small businesses especially, is because they lack marketing expertise. The first thing you have to do in a place like a tennis is you have to size the market and look at the demographics. Are there many foreigners who often have more disposable income? Is the market mostly made up of foreigners who don't have disposable income? Or are there no foreigners? Because a foreigner is a different demographic than a Tico. Ticos can have a lot of income, or middle income, or no income. But they also have different cultural tastes and different ways to approach them. So first you have to choose your market and decide what you want to sell to them. Uh, since I'm a foreigner, I'll just speak only to the foreign market. And so you need to know how many people are in a tennis that are foreigners. Now, we had somebody open up a small wine shop in a tennis. And yes, it's true that many foreigners like to get a good bottle of wine from time to time. But the bottles of wine were $15 to $30. How many foreigners can afford to buy a bottle of wine, say, twice a month? And how many foreigners are in a tennis? And then you take that number and you multiply it by 30 days to get your monthly expense. And then you multiply that by 12 to get your projected annual revenue. And then you see what your costs are. And I think you would very quickly find out that the market will not sustain the costs. The market was too small. There might be, say, 2,000 foreigners in a tennis, and maybe only 25% have the kind of disposable income to buy an expensive bottle of wine twice a month. It's just not enough to really make a good business out of it. So once you've sized your market, first determine your market, then you figure out the size of it, then you figure out how will you market to them. Some people just put up a store and hope people walk in. Other people are smart and they have promotions. They offer free taste tests if it's a food and beverage store. They offer samples to where they can allow the customers to decide if they want the product. And probably in this age of social networks, I think it's very important to find one or two influencers in the market and really work to give them good service, good products, and give them inside access to your product line. And hope that they will then take their impressions and put it on the social networks where everybody else can read it and say, oh, I like this guy. He's pretty smart, so let me go check out this thing he likes. Another reason why small businesses will fail is they fail to have accurate accounting. They don't predict accurately what their expenses and their costs will be in their first year, second year. They don't predict what their revenues will be. And then once they start their business, they're too busy taking care of customers, taking care of staff, taking care of rent payments, etc., that they don't have time to do the accounting to keep track of their company. Some people do write little notes to themselves in a little book, but it's not computerized accounting. And as a reason, and especially if you're dealing in two currencies, you might be dealing in colones for expenses and dollars for income. Well, that's pretty complicated, and a lot of people who are in the middle of opening up their own business don't have time to keep track of that. However, if you don't have time to keep track of it, then it's going to sneak around and bite you in the behind. You have to be up to date and know if your airplane's crashing into cliff. I mean, you're flying along, selling. I had a friend who would sell tea. He was selling Tetley tea, and one day he decided to offer a sale, and he was selling each tea bag. It turns out for 1 cent less than his cost. So he sold a whole bunch of tea bags over the next year. He was so excited, and then he went bankrupt because he didn't realize he was selling below his cost. Now, for question one, what kind of business would I recommend for a tennis? Well, it's important to decide if you want to offer a tangible product or a service. Now, I've done both of those in my careers, and I would have to say that I really like the idea of a service. Tangible products involve a lot of capital, and if they're food, they can spoil and they're not fresh anymore, and you have to throw them out. If they are technological items, then they lose their. You can't. If you have a bunch of iPhone 4s in your inventory, then you've lost money. Technology is like fish; it gets stale and smelly very quickly. You can't keep a fish around in your inventory, and you can't keep technology around. It spoils. So I don't like to deal with products. The other problem with products is you have to have a warehouse. You have to spend money. You have to protect the warehouse. You have to pay for security. I'm not saying that products is a bad way to go, but you better have a lot of capital before you start. And if you or say, oh, I want to do a product, I want to do a service, I would go with the service. Okay, what kind of service? Well, again, we have to decide what your market is. And if you decided your market was foreigners, now what kind of service could you offer them? What do you have or can you get that they don't have easily available to them? Well, obviously, your Spanish-speaking abilities are very valuable. Your connections in your cousins and whatever in the business world around a tennis or around San Jose is something that they don't have, and that's valuable. Your knowledge of the culture, your knowledge of the scenery and the beautiful parks in Costa Rica, that's something that they don't have, and you've grown up with it. So you have to identify what are your skills that you can possibly sell to them. If you decide that your market would be small businesses, and this is something I really think that the small businesses in a tennis need. I went and had to wait in line to buy a product from a store the other day, and it was a small business, and the poor clerk had to fill out like 5 pieces of paper before he was able to sell the product to the person in front of me. And then finally it became my turn, and he had to start filling out papers and then he didn't know if he had the product. He had to go in the back and check. This company needed a bookkeeper. It needed accounting. It needed somebody who would come and sit down with him and do his accounting for him. A bookkeeping for him. You don't have to be a licensed accountant. You just have to be available and able to go and visit and provide great customer services to these poor companies that are just going crazy and too busy running their own company, not busy enough to keep track of their accounting. There's a free program called Wave Apps, WAVEAPPS.com. It's a computerized accounting program, and I use it for a small organization that I manage in a tennis. But I can see, I've used programs before in my other businesses, and this program is as good as QuickBooks. It's as good as, actually better than some of the programs I used, because it has dual currency. It has no problem handling colones or dollars. It automatically calculates that for you. So, and it's quite easy to use, and it would probably take anybody, even if you knew nothing about bookkeeping, It would probably take you about a half hour, no, maybe a half hour a week for about 3 weeks to learn it. That's probably wrong. Maybe it would take you 2 hours a week for 3 weeks to learn the program, to learn bookkeeping. Well, you would learn the program and accidentally you would learn bookkeeping. At least all the bookkeeping you need to know to help these small businesses. And then you can, because it's in the cloud, you could go to the companies and sit down and get them started, because that's all they really need. They know how to do bookkeeping. They just don't have the time to sit down and get started. So you sit down and you interview them. And right away, you're giving them a great service because you're interviewing them and making them think about what they're doing. And then you compile the information into the program, which is quite easy. And then you can go around and visit them once a week and just check in and see how they're doing and update the program and provide reports for them and graphs. You could even take the reports and easily make a graph. So you see a pie chart. And here on the pie chart, this is how much income you got. This is what the red area is all your expenses. And then you can tap on the red area and you can see, oh, I'm spending half of my money on electricity. Why is that? Oh, I'm leaving all my lights on all night. So that'll teach you to maybe cut back on your electric expense. Or I'm spending half my money on free coffee for the customers when they come in. So maybe you would cut back on your coffee expense. But at least you can show them through a pie chart, through graphs, where they're doing good and where they're doing poorly. And that's an extremely valuable service that you can provide. You could probably find about, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 people, 20 companies, maybe say 10. Let's say 10. You find 10 companies, and all you do is you charge them $20 a month, 10,000 colones a month. And you have 10 companies. And it's not going to take you that much time. So you make 100,000 colones a month as a service. You're selling your service. Now, what's your overhead? You have none. You have just your computer. You don't have rent. You don't have warehouse space. You don't have to buy anything. So you have 100,000 in income. And it really, once you get it set up, it's really a part-time deal. You really don't have to spend a lot of hours working it. It takes you a few minutes to generate the reports and a few more minutes to interview the clients and just provide customer service. So, and then you could expand it. You can go to different towns, or you can hire somebody in a different town and almost in a way franchise it, because this service, I believe, is necessary for everybody. You can go to single people like English teachers who are Spanish teachers who are just running all their business out of their pocket. They need help, but they don't have the time and they don't think they're big enough to set up an accounting system. You don't have to be big, but they don't know that. You do. So you go and set up the accounting business for them. By the way, I would be happy to work with perhaps one student or two students to get them their first client, to show them how to use the program and help them get their first client. I would do that for free as a volunteer. The next section, I'm going to talk about my opinion of the Costa Rica economy, and I'm not an expert and I don't really study it that much, but here is basically my feeling. First of all, it's important to recognize how many taxpayers Costa Rica has. If they have 4.5 million people, of those, probably only 1 million are taxpayers. Now, what does that number mean? That means that if you want $100 million highway from here to Limon, well, each of those million taxpayers has to pay $100 for it. That means if you want $25 million to go to Caja this year, that means each of those million taxpayers has to pay $25 each. So 1 million taxpayers can't really get the country to improve its infrastructure and its services enough without going into debt. And I think we're seeing that where the Costa Rica budget is perhaps 6% higher than their income. That would be like if you had, that's called your deficit. That would be like if you make $1,000 a month, and your rent and electricity is $1,100 a month. Well, and your food, everything is $1,100 a month, and you make $1,000 a month. Now, you might be able to get a credit card because you make $1,000 a month, but still, your expenses are going to continue at 1,100. Your income is still only 100 or 1,000. So month after month, you're getting deeper and deeper in debt because of your deficit. And that's what's going on with Costa Rica. Their income is, say, 10 million, and their outgo is, say, 11 million every month. Well, something has to change. You have to reduce your expenses. You have to increase your income. Either one. Choose one, or maybe both. How do you increase your income? Well, you have to create more taxpayers, but you only got 1 million. So the best way to get taxpayers is get them from outside the country. And how do you get taxpayers from outside the country? I think there's two ways. One is foreign direct investment, and that's when you get a company like Intel to build a factory here. So now you have a new taxpayer. And I think Costa Rica is doing an excellent job in that area. They have a problem in that area for certain industries because their electric costs are too expensive. And as a result, it's cheaper to build a manufacturing plant in another country. Their electric costs are expensive because Costa Rica focuses on renewable, sustainable electricity generation. Well, that's wonderful. It's great, but it costs extra. So that just kind of helps. That little fact kind of tells you what industries you want to attract and what industries you don't. But if you get foreign direct investment, that helps you with your taxpayers, with your taxpayer base. But the other obvious place to get taxpayers is through tourism. And why would people come to Costa Rica? Well, because your electricity costs are high. And why is that? Because you're using sustainable methods to create electricity. And the world loves the fact that Costa Rica doesn't use carbon to generate electricity most days of the year. So you need to emphasize that. You need to focus on tourism. You have to treat tourism like a huge sacred cow, and you have to do everything you can to protect it. Now, you're at risk. Your tourism's growing, but you're at risk. One of the problems that areas of risk is that one day a newspaper reporter could come to Costa Rica wanting to make a big name for himself, because Costa Rica is quite famous around the world. So this reporter comes and he finds out that this wonderful ecological paradise doesn't have any sewage treatment plants. That means all of the garbage goes into the Tarcoles River and goes into the ocean. Well, that's terrible. That's not ecologically sound. And then he goes further and he finds out that the Ticos don't segregate their trash. They put bottles, plastic, paper, cans, all in the same trash can. And every other developed country in the world segregates it. They put cans in one bag and they put bottles in another bag. But this Costa Rica, which is supposed to be the ecological paradise, actually is not. So he has and the other thing is he will write an article about a terrible custom they have in the, especially near the coast, where you're not allowed to flush toilet paper down the toilet. That's because the pipes, and you don't have any septic tanks or sewage treatment plants, or you don't have sufficient. So the idea of using a toilet and taking the toilet paper and putting it in a trash can next to the toilet, that is barbaric. And so if he wrote an article talking about those three things, your tourism industry would collapse in 1 week. It would disappear. Now, right now, you're making a couple of $1 billion on your tourist industry. That one reporter can make you lose a couple of $1 billion. Can you afford that? Where will the jobs go? Where will your future go? It will be a disaster. So I'm just giving you a heads up. Watch out for that and start talking to your congressmen, your diputados, or whoever, and make sure that you impress upon them that your futures are at stake. If they don't increase their building codes to make sure that every hotel, every restaurant has good sewage handling. And you also have to tell your governments, your city governments, to make sure that people segregate their trash. Now the reporter comes down and he has nothing to write about. So he can't make his name, he can't become famous. But if you don't do that, uh, and he comes down and sees the situation as it is today, he will become very famous because he will write a headline story all over the world about the fake ecological paradise that's called Costa Rica.